I'm Kenshin. Welcome to Talking History. Please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Also, don't forget to turn on the notification bell. Thank you. Today's historical discussion is about the Munich Agreement, which pertains to the appeasement of the Nazis. I think we can all feel that the world has lost politicians with ideals, leaving behind only the likes of mere politicians. The only difference lies in their appearance and level of greed. For instance, the late American Secretary of State Henry Kissinger was undoubtedly the epitome of extreme greed and a craving for power. His legacy continues to affect Taiwan and the world even now. In 1972, he facilitated then-President Nixon's visit to China, which led to the signing of the Shanghai Communique, ending hostilities and preparing for diplomatic relations. Subsequently, the policy of engagement with China began, and in 1979, the Carter administration officially established diplomatic relations. For nearly half a century, Kissinger reportedly visited China over 100 times, being hailed by the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, as a longtime friend of China, showing the depth of the mutual interests between the two sides. On May 23, 2022, he attended the World Economic Forum's spring Davos meeting via video and publicly stated that Ukraine should abandon Donbas and Crimea to Russia in exchange for a peace agreement to end the war quickly. Of course, this shameless argument, sacrificing another country's territory for one's own interests and agreeing to Russia's annexation of part of Ukraine, was immediately met with strong protests from Ukrainian President Zelensky. He believed it was a repetition of the appeasement of aggression before World War II, and Kissinger, this old scoundrel, naturally stirred up a storm of criticism. Zelensky criticized Kissinger's remarks at the Davos meeting, likening them to the Munich Agreement of appeasement to the Nazis in 1938. At that time, Zelensky, a Jewish descendant, sarcastically remarked that perhaps Mr. Kissinger's calendar was not set to 2022, but rather 1938. He seemed to think he was not in Davos, but speaking to everyone in Munich back then. In the real 1938, when he and his family fled Nazi Germany, he was just 15 years old. Now let's talk about the Munich Agreement mentioned by Zelensky. First, let's talk about the historical background. We all know that in March 1938, Nazi Germany successfully annexed Austria without bloodshed. Hitler's next target was Czechoslovakia. However, this time he couldn't use the same trick, but there were still conditions he could exploit. At that time, there were over 3 million Sudeten Germans living in the Sudetenland region within Czechoslovakia, which provided an opportunity for Nazi Germany to intervene. What did Hitler do? First, on March 28, 1938, in Berlin, Hitler met with the leader of the Sudeten German Party, SDP, Konrad Henlein, who was based in Czechoslovakia and mainly represented radical populism. Under instruction, Henlein presented demands that the democratic government of Czechoslovakia, led by President Eduard Beneš, could not accept. This was a clear provocation. Subsequently, Hitler claimed that he could not tolerate the persecution of ethnic Germans outside Germany and intended to right the wrongs for them. He used this as an excuse to cleanse Czechoslovakia militarily, etc. This pattern is almost identical to the recent Russian invasion of Ukraine. It can be said that Putin blatantly copied Hitler's playbook, hence the apt nickname Putler, isn't it? Or is it that authoritarian regimes are all cut from the same cloth? Even heavyweight politicians like Kissinger must be eager to copy others' work, right? On September 12, Hitler openly threatened that if the Czech government did not give fair treatment to the Sudeten Germans, Germany would take immediate action. Of course, the Czech government would not let itself be bullied. It mobilized and strengthened its border forces. Moreover, after World War I, Czechoslovakia regained its sovereignty under the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, with the support of Britain and France, even signing a mutual assistance treaty with France. If Germany really invaded and fought with Czechoslovakia, according to the treaty, Britain and France would inevitably be dragged into the war, which was Hitler's biggest concern at the time. But what could the two countries, reluctant to be dragged into war, do? On the night of September 13, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain urgently telegrammed Hitler, expressing his desire to meet and peacefully resolve the Czech issue. 2 days later, on the 15th, Chamberlain flew to Germany for the meeting, and after it ended, he rushed back to London overnight, pressuring the Czechoslovak government, hoping they would resolve the Sudetenland issue according to the principle of national self-determination. It is said that on the same day, September 15, due to the tense relations between Germans and the Czech government, Beneš secretly proposed to cede 6,000 square kilometers, 2,300 square miles, of territory to Germany, in exchange for the expulsion of 1.5 to 2 million Sudeten Germans by Czechoslovakia. These people would be accepted by Germany, but surprisingly, Hitler did not respond to this proposal. On the 22nd, Hitler presented new demands during the meeting with Chamberlain. Czechoslovakia should be dissolved and its territories should be redistributed to Poland, Hungary, and Germany. Areas where Germanic peoples were the majority should be occupied by Germany. After several discussions, Hitler demanded that Czechs in the Sudetenland region should leave by October 1. The Czechoslovak government naturally rejected these conditions and announced total mobilization on the 23rd to prepare for the worst. Meanwhile, Poland also sent troops to occupy the town of Zaolzie in Czechoslovakia. Seeing this, it should be said that Poland had little reason to complain about being invaded by Nazi Germany during World War II. After all, the fact that they initiated aggression against others first is an undeniable truth. On the 24th, Hitler issued the Godesberg Memorandum, demanding that Czechoslovakia withdraw all its troops from the Sudetenland region by September 28. On the 26th, Hitler declared in a rally in Berlin that the Sudetenland was his final territorial demand in Europe, reiterating the deadline of September 28 for a response. Again, this sounds similar to Putin's remarks before the invasion of Ukraine. Isn't this blatant plagiarism? The next day, on the 27th, Hitler ordered 7 German divisions to enter positions along the German-Czech border. After the deadline passed, Czechoslovakia, unwilling to risk it, immediately mobilized 1 million troops, suggesting that war seemed inevitable. On the 29th, Chamberlain flew to Germany for the second time and convened a summit in Munich with Hitler, Mussolini, and Daladier, the leaders of Germany, Italy, Britain, and France. The main content was the transfer of the Sudetenland to Germany. However, the Czechoslovak government, forced to cede territory, was not allowed to attend this meeting. This clearly showed the politicians' face, treating others' interests as bargaining chips and not allowing the parties involved to have a say. The outcome of the meeting was the famous Munich Agreement. This agreement was proposed by Mussolini, and in essence, it was almost identical to the Godesberg proposal. German troops would occupy the Sudetenland by October 10, and an international commission would decide the future of other disputed areas. However, what's even more outrageous is that Britain and France directly informed Czechoslovakia that they could choose to resist Nazi Germany alone, or they could submit to the agreement and be annexed. Faced with this dire situation, the Czechoslovak government knew that resisting Nazi Germany alone was unrealistic, so on September 30, they reluctantly agreed to comply with the agreement. But the most shameless of all was Chamberlain. Why, on that day, after a short rest, he went to Hitler's apartment on Regent Street and asked him to sign a declaration called the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, symbolizing our desire for our two countries to no longer wage war against each other. Later that day, upon returning to England, he gave a controversial speech to the crowd in London, titled Peace in Our Time. This peace was built on the surrender of others' territory, yet he dared to say it. Returning to the present, Zelensky ridiculed those who suggested Ukraine should give up as great geopolitical figures, ignoring the interests of the Ukrainian people, seeking to exchange millions of lives in Ukraine for imaginary peace. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba, upon learning of the proposal to cede territory for peace, could only smile bitterly, saying, "I respect Kissinger's opinion, but I am glad he has no official position in the US government. He has his opinions, but we strongly oppose them." He sarcastically portrayed Kissinger as a shameless politician with no real influence. How does the US view this shameless old politician? Stephen Young, former director of the American Institute in Taiwan, 8, said in an interview with Radio Free Asia last year that people like Kissinger, who advocate for letting China develop its authoritarianism as long as it doesn't interfere with our business with China, are already in the minority in US policy circles. Another former 8 director, William Stanton, published 2 articles in Taiwan News in early April 2021, exposing Kissinger's role as the Grandmaster, leading retired US officials and political business elites to seek fortune in China, pointing out that he is China's most important fan, and spent most of his career flattering the Chinese. From the Chinese perspective, of course, he is just being used by them. Perhaps Kissinger sees himself as Chamberlain, but Kenshin believes the biggest similarity between the two is shamelessness, treating other countries' interests as bargaining chips, and as long as they don't suffer, they don't care. This former heavyweight of the American political scene ultimately spent his glory serving the CCP, and before he died, he sided with the CCP in defending Russia. After revealing his cards, all that awaits him is an endless stream of criticism and shame engraved on his tombstone.